Hello everyone and welcome to another module of Economics and Law Part 1. I'm Dr. Divyancha Kumar, Assistant Professor at Chitkara University, Punjab. Today, we will delve into another topic of economic theories of constitution. Let us start with the introduction first. The study of economics of constitutions delves into the profound impact that constitutional frameworks have on economic outcomes within societies. At its core, this field analyzes how the foundational rules and structures established by constitutions shape incentives, constraints, and behaviors that drive economic activities. Constitutions serve as the bedrock upon which political and economic institutions are built, influencing everything from property rights protection to the enforcement of contracts and the allocation of resources. Key economic principles such as efficiency, equity, and growth are profoundly influenced by constitutional design. A well-crafted constitution fosters an environment conducive to economic prosperity by providing clear rules of engagement, ensuring the protection of property rights, and establishing mechanisms for resolving disputes. By delineating the separation of powers, implementing checks and balances, and stipulating fiscal policies, constitutions mitigate risks associated with arbitrary government actions and enhance predictability in economic transactions. Moreover, the process of constitutional change itself can impact economic stability and investor confidence, underscoring the intricate relationship between legal frameworks and economic outcomes. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for policymakers, scholars, and practitioners seeking to promote sustainable development, innovation, and inclusive economic growth. The economics of constitutions offers a nuanced perspective on how constitutional rules influence economic behavior and outcomes, highlighting the pivotal role of institutional design in shaping the economic landscape of nations. Now let's talk about the economics of constitution. The economics of constitutions constitutes a crucial field within economic theory that examines how constitutional frameworks and institutional arrangements impact economic performance and outcomes. At its essence, this branch of study integrates principles from economics, political science, and law to analyze the profound influence of constitutional design on economic behavior, incentives, and the distribution of wealth within societies. Now let's talk about the foundational principles and impact. Central to understanding the economics of constitutions is recognizing that constitutions serve as foundational documents that establish the rules of game for both political and economic interactions within a society. These fundamental rules define the limits and powers of governmental institutions, establish mechanisms for decision-making and conflict resolution, and safeguard individual rights and freedoms. Economic theory posits that the nature and content of constitutional rules profoundly influence economic outcomes through various mechanisms. Let's talk about the property rights and contract enforcements. The Constitution plays a pivotal role in defining and protecting property rights. The strong constitutional guarantees of property rights provide individuals and businesses with the confidence that their investments will be secure from arbitrary government actions or encroachments. This in turn encourages investment, entrepreneurship, and economic growth by ensuring that individuals can reap the rewards of their efforts. Next is the rule of law and economic stability. A robust constitution promotes the rule of law, which is essential for economic stability and predictability. The rule of law ensures that laws are applied consistently, contracts are enforceable, and disputes are resolved impartially. By reducing uncertainty and transaction cost, a strong rule of law fosters a conducive environment for economic transactions and investments. Next, let's talk about the fiscal policy and governmental restraints. Now, the constitutional provisions often include fiscal rules that constrain government spending and taxation. For example, balanced budget requirements or debt limits can prevent excessive government borrowing, which helps maintain economic stability and avoids crowding out private investments. Moreover, constitutional constraints on fiscal policy can promote long-term fiscal sustainability, thereby reducing the risk of economic crisis and inflationary pressures. Next is the institutional design and governance. The institutional design established by a constitution shapes the incentives and behaviors of political and economic actors. Separation of powers, checks and balances, and mechanisms for accountability are critical components that prevent the concentration of power and mitigate the risk of government abuse. By fostering a transparent and accountable governance framework, well-designed constitutions reduce corruption. It promotes efficient resource allocation and enhances public trust in institutions. Now let's talk about the analytical frameworks and case studies. Now, scholars and economists employ various analytical frameworks to assess the economic impact of constitutional arrangements. Comparative constitutional analysis examines differences in economic performance across countries with different constitutional designs. For instance, countries with strong protections for property rights and robust rule of law tend to attract more foreign investment and experience higher rates of economic growth compared to nations with weaker institutional frameworks. Moreover, case studies provide valuable insights into how specific constitutional provisions influence economic outcomes in practice. For example, the introduction of constitutional reforms aimed at liberalizing markets and enhancing property rights in countries such as Chile and Estonia has been associated with significant improvements in economic growth and development over time. Now let's talk about the challenges and considerations. Despite the theoretical benefits of well-designed constitutions, challenges and considerations exist in practice. The first is the constitutional change and adaptation. The constitutions must adapt to evolving societal needs and economic realities. The process of constitutional change can be lengthy and contentious, requiring broad societal consensus and political stability. Moreover, poorly crafted constitutional reforms or amendments can inadvertently weaken institutional integrity and undermine economic stability. Next, let's talk about the implementation and enforcement. The effectiveness of constitutional provisions often depend on implementation and enforcement. In many countries, weak judicial independence or political interference can undermine the rule of law and erode trust in constitutional protections, thereby limiting their positive economic impact. Next is the cultural and historical context. the economic impact of constitutional provisions can vary depending on cultural norms, historical legacies, and institutional capacity within a society. Cultural factors such as attitudes towards property rights or the role of government can shape the interpretation and application of constitutional rules in practice. In conclusion, the economics of constitutions offer a comprehensive framework for understanding how constitutional rules and institutional arrangements shape economic behavior and outcomes within society. By establishing clear rules for governance, protecting property rights, promoting fiscal discipline, and fostering institutional integrity, well-designed constitutions contribute to economic stability, growth, and prosperity. However, achieving these outcomes requires careful consideration of historical context, societal values, and effective implementation mechanisms. As such, ongoing research and analysis in this field are crucial for informing policy decisions and promoting sustainable economic development worldwide. Now let's talk about the economic theories of constitutions. The economic theories of constitutions represent a profound exploration into how the design and structure of constitutional frameworks shape economic outcomes within societies. These theories, rooted in principle from economics, political science, and law, offer valuable insights into the mechanisms through which constitutional rules influence economic behavior, incentives, and ultimately the prosperity of nations. Now let's talk about the public choice theory. The public choice theory, pioneered by scholars like James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock, posits that individuals within political institutions act rationally in their own self-interest. Applied to constitutional economics, this theory suggests that constitutional rules are often shaped by the interest and preferences of political actors seeking to maximize their influence and benefits. It underscores the importance of understanding how political incentives embedded in the constitutional design can impact economic policies, regulatory framework, and resource allocation decisions. Next, let's talk about some criticism. Now, the critics argue that public choice theory oversimplifies political behavior by assuming that all actors are solely motivated by self-interest. It may overlook broader societal interest, collective goods, and altruistic motives that influence political decision-making. Next, let's talk about the transaction cost economics. Coined by Nobel laureate Ronald Coase and further developed by Oliver Williamson, transaction cost economics focuses on how the cost associated with economic transactions such as information asymmetries, bargaining costs, and enforcement expenses affect market efficiency and institutional design. Within constitutional economics, transaction cost theory highlights the role of constitutional rules in reducing uncertainties and transaction cost, thereby promoting economic exchange, property rights protection, and contract enforcement. Now, some criticism about this is that the critics argue that transaction cost economics may undervalue non-market transactions, such as social norms and informal institutions that also play critical roles in economic governance. Moreover, it may not fully capture the dynamic nature of institutions and their evolution over time. Now let's talk about the new institutional economics. The new institutional economics integrates insights from economics, law and organizational theory to analyze how institutions, both formally, for example, constitutional rules, and informal, for example, social norms, influence the economic behavior and outcomes. The NIE emphasizes that institutions provide the essential infrastructure for economic activities by reducing uncertainty, facilitating cooperation, and enabling efficient resource allocation. In the context of constitutional economics, NIE underscores the critical role of constitutional rules in providing a stable framework for economic growth, investment, and development. The criticism of this is, the critics argue that NIE sometimes overlooks cultural factors, historical context, and path dependencies that shape institutional development and performance. Additionally, NIE frameworks may not adequately address issues of power asymmetries and distributional outcomes within societies. Next is the constitutional political economy. Now, the constitutional political economy examines how political institutions and constitutional arrangements impact the economic policies, government structures, and ultimately economic performance. This approach focuses on the importance of constitutional constraints such as checks and balances, separation of powers, and electoral systems in shaping incentives for policy makers and fostering economic stability, innovation, and market competition. The criticism of this is that the critics argue that constitutional political economy may not fully account for the dynamic interactions between political and economic forces. Moreover, it may struggle to provide clear policy prescriptions in complex, real-world settings where institutional contexts may vary widely. Economic theories of constitutions offer valuable frameworks for understanding the intricate relationships between constitutional design and economic outcomes. From public choice theories, insights into political incentives to transaction cost economics focuses on reducing transaction cost, and NIE's emphasis on institutional infrastructure. These theories enrich our understanding on how constitutional rules shape economic behavior and development trajectories. However, addressing critiques regarding oversimplification of political behavior, neglect of cultural context, distributional impacts, and implementation challenges is essential for advancing our understanding and application for economic theories of constitution in real-world settings. Embracing interdisciplinary perspectives and empirical research will be crucial for informing effective constitutional reforms and promoting sustainable economic growth and development globally. Now let's talk about the criticism and challenges of economic theories. The economic theories of constitutions, while providing valuable insights into the relationship between constitutional frameworks and economic outcomes, face several criticisms and challenges that necessitate a nuanced understanding and consideration in their application. First is the oversimplification of political behavior. One of the primary criticisms leveled against economic theory of constitutions, particularly public choice theory, is the potential oversimplification of political behavior. Public choice theory posits that political actors, including legislators and bureaucrats, act in their self-interest to maximize personal utility or power. Critics argue that this perspective may overlook the complexities of political decision-making, which often involves consideration of ideology, public opinion, historical legacies, and institutional norms beyond narrow self-interest. Next is the neglect of cultural and historical context. The economic theories of constitution often emphasizes universal principles of economic efficiency and institutional design, sometimes at the expense of cultural and historical context. Cultural norms, societal values, and historical experiences shape the interpretation and implementation of constitutional rules in practice. For example, attitudes towards property rights, the role of government, and the legitimacy of institutional authorities can significantly influence the effectiveness of constitutional protections and economic policies. Next is the dynamic nature of institutions. Institutions, including constitutional rules, are dynamic and evolve over time in response to changing economic, social, and political conditions. The economic theories of constitutions may struggle to capture the adaptive nature of institutions and their complex interactions within economic behavior. The path-dependent evolution of institutions, influenced by historical events and incremental challenges, poses challenges for applying static economic models to predict long-term institutional outcomes. Next is the distributional consequences. Constitutional rules and institutional arrangements can have significant distributional consequences within societies, impacting the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and political power. Critics argue that economic theories of constitutions often prioritizes efficiency and economic growth without sufficiently addressing issues of equity, social justice, and the distributional effects of institutional design. For instance, constitutional protections for property rights may benefit wealthy elites more than marginalized communities, exacerbating inequalities rather than promoting inclusive development. Next is the implementation and enforcement challenges. The effectiveness of constitutional provisions depends critically on their implementation and enforcement mechanisms. Weak judicial independence, political interference, corruption, and inadequate enforcement can undermine the rule of law and limit the economic benefits associated with strong constitutional protections. In many countries, constitutional reforms aimed at enhancing economic governance and protecting property rights have faltered due to institutional weaknesses and regulatory capture by powerful interest groups. Next is the complex interaction between political and economic forces. The economic theories of constitution, such as constitutional political economy, focus on the interactions between political institutions, constitutional rules, and economic policies. However, these theories may struggle to capture the intricate dynamics and feedback loops between political and economic forces in real-world settings. Political instability shifts in public opinion and external shocks, example, the economic crisis or the geopolitical events, can significantly influence the implementation and effectiveness of constitutional reforms aimed at promoting economic growth and stability. Next is the challenges in policy prescriptions. Economic theories of constitutions provide valuable analytical frameworks for understanding institutional design and economic outcomes. However, translating theoretical insights into actionable policy prescriptions require careful consideration of contextual factors, stakeholder interest, and practical implementation challenges. One-size-fits-all approaches to constitutional reforms may overlook diverse national context, institutional capacities, and societal preferences, limiting their applicability and effectiveness in promoting sustainable economic development. Next is the constitutional economics. Central to the study of the constitutional economics is the recognition that different constitutional arrangements generate distinct incentives and constraints for economic agents. For instance, the design of property rights, taxation policy, and regulatory frameworks can either foster economic efficiency and growth or hinder them. By analyzing these constitutional arrangements, economists seek to understand how they shape individual incentives, collective decision-making processes, and ultimately economic outcomes. A key concept within constitutional economics is the idea of constitutional choice. This refers to the deliberate selection and modification of constitutional rules to achieve desired economic and political ends. Economists in this field argue that the process of constitutional decision-making is inherently normative, requiring careful consideration of the trade-offs between individuals, liberties, collective goals, and institutional effectiveness. Furthermore, constitutional economics offers insights into the dynamics of institutional change and adaptation over time. As societies evolve and face new economic challenges, the adequacy and flexibility of existing constitutional frameworks come into question. Scholars in this field explore how constitutional rules can be adapted or reformed to address emerging economic issues while maintaining political stability and social cohesion. Practical applications of constitutional economics abound in policy domains such as public finance, environmental regulation, and market competition. Policymakers often consult constitutional economists to evaluate the economic implications of proposed constitutional amendments or legal reforms. By conducting rigorous analysis of these proposals, constitutional economists provide valuable guidance on how to design institutional arrangements that promote economic efficiency, equity, and sustainable development. In conclusion, the economic theories of constitutions, as articulated by scholars such as James Buchanan and others in the field of constitutional economics, underscore the foundational role of institutional frameworks in shaping economic outcomes. These theories depart from traditional economic analysis by emphasizing that constitutional rules are not neutral but profoundly influence the incentives, behavior, and outcomes of economic agents within a society. In a sense, the economic theories of constitution underscore the pivotal role of constitutional frameworks in shaping economic behaviors and outcomes. By integrating economic analysis with constitutional theory, scholars and policymakers alike can foster environments conducive to economic prosperity, innovation, and societal advancements. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you very much.